I get really surprised when Batman media of all things gets accused of Copaganda, especially considering how often it utilizes corruption within the police force for the plot and world building. I came across this video talking about why the Batman is Copaganda alongside the Nolan Batman movies. And to give context for this video, this guy does like the Batman and thinks it's a good movie. He just has criticisms towards how the police are depicted. I'm gonna start with a somewhat long segment of his video, but the purpose of that will be to put everything he's saying into full context before I respond. He does have a lot of these long segments, some of which I don't play in this video because I'd be needlessly playing very long segments of his video without commentary. If you want to hear everything he says, the video is always linked in the description.
So what is the purpose of police? Because thanks to the mainstream media's depiction of it, a lot of those who don't have first-hand experience with the police think that they truly were formed with the intention of stopping crime. That, unfortunately, is not the case. The police as we know them today were formed initially for managing individuals on behalf of systems of economic and political inequality, dating all the way back to 1829 by Sir Robert Peel, who established the system when he was part of the British colonization of Ireland, in order to suppress the growth of rioters, insurrectionists, and political uprisings against Netflix's The Crown. This was adapted for the colonizers stateside 9 years later, but had to be adjusted in order for the suppression in question to fit the uproar of the working class thanks to immigration and industrialization. This motto spread from Boston to New York in 1844, to Chicago in 1855 with the election of Mayor Levy Boone and the creation of the first special police force in the nation. And just like that, the intent for policing, managing the poor, the foreign, and non-white in the name of the ruling hierarchy that may threaten their power if left unregulated, spread across the nation and has remained the core of it to this day.
So whether or not policing was originally created with the intent to stop crime doesn't really have much to do with the intention of policing in present day. A country can be originally founded with the intentions of leading people through fear and intimidation without giving them freedom, but if a film takes place in that country where it isn't run with those intentions in present day, then it's not really presenting misinformation to people about how the country currently operates. As you'll see in job descriptions for police officers, they're generally supposed to enforce the law and are encouraged to help their communities. That's how police officers should be operating, and in order to have a country that functions on a basic level, a form of law enforcement is necessary. In the Batman and the Dark Knight trilogy, you'll see that officers like Jim Gordon are operating off those principles, whereas most of the other cops are portrayed as corrupt given the crime-ridden environment in Gotham City. Many of the supervillains are associated with police officers and make as much progress as they do because of it.
So when we catch the police red-handed doing #just oppression things, knowing these are the unchanged core functions that they serve, especially with everything we've currently seen regarding civil unrest via protests against brutality, systemic racism, and capitalistic intent, things start making a bit more sense. But what doesn't make sense is how said hierarchy has been successful in painting the image of police in such a positive and necessary light for a lot of us after witnessing everything that we have these past few years, that they are also here to protect us from crime.
The police are not solely depicted this way in the Batman movies. In the Batman even says he doesn't trust any of them when strategizing with Gordon.
I don't trust any of them. Do you?
I only trust you.
In The Dark Knight, Gordon only sees his fellow officers as a necessity to get the job done, rather than people he can fully trust.
I don't get political points for being an idealist. I have to do the best I can with what I have.
When Harvey is in the hospital, Gordon tries to find out who took Rachel because he isn't sure which of his cops he can trust.
Harvey, I need to know which of my men I can trust.
You're sitting down there with scum like Wirtz and Ramirez and you're talking...
Why would you listen to me now?
I'm sorry, Harvey.
And in Batman Begins, Bruce literally says that Jim Gordon is one of the few good cops.
You're a good cop. One of the few.
Because in actuality, felony arrests from cops in situations that promote officers to hero status are as rare as shiny Pokemon. Those joining the force with the intention of protecting their communities under the same light are more than likely to spend the bulk of their career on actionless patrols, handling parking and driving violations, filing paperwork, and taking reports from crimes that they'll never solve if they're detectives, with the ones that are actually followed through making the show 48 Hours, another show that promotes the misconception of the police by highlighting the rarities.
But in Batman media, police action is going to be a lot more common than it is in the real world because supervillains are frequently showing up. And oftentimes, the police try to stop Batman because they think he's going to get in the way a lot of the time. It might not be realistic, but it doesn't have to be in a fictional story.
As veteran police officer David Bailey said, "The police do not prevent crime. This is one of the best kept secrets of modern life. Experts know it, the police know it, but the public does not know it. Yet the police pretend that they are society's best defense against crime and continually argue that if they are given more resources, especially personnel, they will be able to protect communities against crime. This is a myth."
Firstly, there are going to be police officers that truly care about their communities or preventing crimes from harming others, the same way you could argue that there are doctors out there who truly care about the health and well-being of people and finding more solutions to health problems. I know people out there like to claim that every single police officer in existence is a bad person, but writing off every single officer like this without an exception is not only impossible to substantiate, but that's also just not how we evaluate humans in general. Jim Gordon is a police officer, but he wants to do what's right and fight for the people of Gotham. The idea that a police officer can act this way isn't unrealistic because it's not unrealistic for humans to believe in good.
This city just showed you that it's full of people ready to believe in good.
So why is it that we initially think this way about the police?
Probably because that's what they're supposed to do in present day, the same way doctors are supposed to respond to medical emergencies and find solutions to health-related problems.
Well, just like I mentioned earlier, that's mostly due to the romanticization of police work in mainstream media.
Most of the police are depicted as corrupt. They explicitly outline that Falcone has essentially been the mayor of Gotham for many years. The police aren't depicted as this outstanding example of justice and heroism. They're depicted as a messy organization that needs to be improved. Just because characters like Jim Gordon or Officer Martinez are depicted as good people doesn't mean the film is saying that the police should be viewed as such by default.
One of the things that I really appreciate nowadays looking back in my childhood is that the Batman movies that I grew up with had a Gotham PD that never really illustrated to me that being a police officer was a necessary position. Because I grew up with the likes of the Burton and Schumacher Batman films, the Christopher Reeve Superman films, and even the Ghostbuster films that always showed the police as the muscle for the government, aiming to put the working class in their place once they got too busy/popular. Young Laron always looked at the police growing up and thought, man, if superheroes existed, would y'all be out of work?
But if we look at the modern Batman movies, you'll notice that Batman makes a difference that the police themselves couldn't. Batman put Falcone to justice in both Christopher Nolan and Matt Reeves' interpretations, despite how difficult that has been for a long time. The police weren't getting the job done because many of them were corrupt, and even then, the police are an antagonistic force in all 4 of these movies. Commissioner Loeb orders a manhunt against Batman in Batman Begins. Batman has to fight SWAT teams in The Dark Knight. Batman gets chased down by the police in The Dark Knight Rises, even to the point where the police ignored the robbers that they were initially trying to capture, and the movie doesn't glorify the police for this.
Alfred, enough. The police weren't getting it done.
In the Richard Donner Superman movie and the other Christopher Reeve films that followed, the police were pretty much non-existent. It wasn't until Man of Steel when I first saw a militarized response to Superman's existence on screen. The police in the 80s and 90s Batman era of films, on the other hand, was pretty much my response to how I took the seriousness of the police as a child. They were unable to successfully arrest Jack Napier or Batman on multiple occasions.
So, just like what we have in the Dark Knight trilogy and the Batman.
Had no idea how to respond to Joker's threats and acts of domestic terrorism.
So, just like what we have in the Dark Knight trilogy and the Batman.
And the moment they realized Batman was better at doing their job for them, they made the bat signal to call him whenever they needed help, and were licking his boots more than how cop apologists are supposed to lick theirs.
So, again, just like what we have in the Dark Knight trilogy and the Batman.
But then Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy happened, which was inspired by multiple comic book stories that featured the importance of both Batman and Gotham PD's synergy thanks to the relationship between him and Commissioner Gordon. Stories like Batman Year One, The Killing Joke, The Long Halloween, The Dark Knight Returns, Nightfall, and No Man's Land, to name a few. And while a lot of these stories in question have Batman rightfully going after the rich and powerful that reinforce the corruption within the police department that's responsible for his distrust in the police force, save Jim Gordon, Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy handled the idea of the police in a very liberalistic Hollywood-friendly fantasy way that never really addressed those real-life influences for why policing is the way that it is. Instead, it handles the situation in a way that does nothing but reinforce the pro-police propaganda regarding why they're necessary through a romanticized white liberal lens. Batman Begins reinforced the popular ideal of there being a few bad apples in the bunch.
If it were a few bad apples, Falcone wouldn't have stayed in power for so long. Maroni wouldn't have had several police officers on his payroll. Bruce wouldn't be saying that Jim is one of the few good cops. And even for cops that aren't being paid off by mob bosses, they're still depicted as flawed and fail to act on what's best for the city. Commissioner Loeb is an example of this, since he tried to send the police after Batman. Or Peter Foley, who's indirectly responsible for Bane's rise in power because he prioritized his personal vendetta against Batman over justice. While he does redeem himself in the end, the fact he needed to redeem himself is an acknowledgement that his previous behavior shouldn't be acceptable.
That all that's necessary for the police to regain their legitimacy from corruption and the like is to remove the officers like Detective Flask, motivated by outside criminal institutions, racism, and power abuse, and replace them with individuals the like of Jim Gordon and his team from The Dark Knight.
Some of Gordon's men are corrupt, and Gordon is directly criticized for not listening to Dent's warnings enough, both out of desperation, but also out of doubt towards his ability to trust Dent. So getting rid of corrupt police officers isn't even presented as an easy solution. They still shed light on the responsibility a police officer has to their community, and how even good people can make mistakes with significant consequences.
And Robin John Blake from The Dark Knight Rises, in order to better establish the naive yet commendable goals of them being better trained, held accountable for their actions, and less brutal and racist.
I mean, what you listed can definitely help with the issues regarding police misconduct, but if the films aren't doing a good job in your eyes, what exactly should they do? What are some of the better solutions they should be presenting? If there isn't a better solution, then what exactly is wrong with their messaging? To me, it seems like these movies are aiming for messages that extend beyond what the police should do, and are more so geared towards what human beings should be doing. Batman Begins talks about how your actions should define you, and the importance of seeking justice rather than fighting for yourself or your own needs. This is a message that can be applied to police officers, and if that message is understood, positive change can occur in the communities that police officers are meant to look after.
A hero can be anyone, even a man doing something as simple and reassuring as putting a coat around a young boy's shoulders to let him know the world hadn't ended.
Not taking into consideration or even acknowledging that law enforcement as we know it was never created with the intention of public safety or crime control.
But that's what people like Jim Gordon strive for, and that's what the police should strive for in order to leave a positive impact on their community.
The Dark Knight played around with this fantasy even further by entertaining what would happen if you purge the problematic cops in order to build a department the way society expects them to behave without changing the way policing is at its core.
The Dark Knight doesn't purge the problematic cops, they're responsible for some of the biggest plot points in the story, like Harvey Dent becoming Two-Face.
So, because Chris Nolan Jonathan Nolan, and David Shitbag Goyer use Batman Begins as a way to bring legitimacy back to Gotham PD, as is the goal when trying to defend its necessity whenever defunding or abolition is brought up.
Where's this ever stated or suggested in Batman Begins? Nobody suggests defunding or abolishing the police to get rid of its corruption. We do have an organization that's in favor of abolishing the entire system, but they're the bad guys for pretty obvious reasons. And while I can understand defunding a police department if they're clearly using their resources to harm people when funding should be provided for them to do their jobs, abolishing the entire police system is an invitation for anarchy, which is what people like the Joker want. If my neighbor didn't like the way I decorated my home and therefore tried to shoot me or something, I can't call the police to stop him if the entire system is abolished. While police reform is important, abolishing the entire system is going to create a messy domino effect. Because like I said, some way of enforcing the law is absolutely necessary for a society to function.
The majority of the narrative for The Dark Knight, in retrospect, becomes nothing but a Blue Lives Matter jerkfest.
No more dead cops!
You do realize this is a cop saying this, right? There's an inherent bias because of who is saying that. And he's saying this in support of Batman turning himself in, which Harvey Dent rightfully states as being asked of out of fear rather than rational thought.
But that's not why we're demanding he turn himself in. We're doing it because we're scared.
The film is not on this police officer's side.
Endure, Master Wayne. Take it. They'll hate you for it, but that's the point of Batman. He can be the outcast. He can make the choice that no one else can make. The right choice.
And you killed 6 of my friends.
So the next example is a police officer that's pissed off because the Joker killed 6 of his friends? Should we not feel bad about the literal loss of life just because those people were police officers? Is it now an unreasonable motivation for that officer to lose his cool and attack the Joker? And it's not just the police that the movie wants to make you feel bad for. What about the most important death in the movie?
Rachel!
5 dead. 2 of them cops.
Gordon brings up the 2 cops because his point is that you can't just sweep it under the rug that easily.
You can't sweep that.
And those cops aren't even people that Gordon respects. He assumes the dead cops are Warts and Ramirez, who would be responsible for Rachel's death and Harvey's kidnapping.
And if I can be real here for a second, since I'm looking at the 3 films from this perspective, all The Dark Knight Rises does is try and discredit mass movements of public expressions of rage thanks to the likes of systemic oppression, capitalistic greed, and lack of wealth distribution as a motivator brought about by Bane and Talia al Ghul, the 2 antagonists of the movie, in order to drive Gotham into chaos before destroying it. Such a real-life attempt at a modern-day coup would disrupt the real-life social order that both white liberals and those who benefit from it are used to. So the movie uses said antagonized example of disruption to justify the overfunding of police forces in order to keep the fabrication of Western society in place, when the funds can be easily applied in places where they'll do some actual good.
I'm lost at the premise and how it reached the conclusion. So he brings up mass movements of public expressions of rage due to systematic oppression, capitalistic greed, and the lack of wealth distribution, and claims that these are the motivations of Bane and Talia in The Dark Knight Rises. And the movie tries to discredit their motivations while using the antagonists to justify the overfunding of police at the end of the film. There's a lot to break down. The first problem is that Bane and Talia aren't motivated by wanting to help lower class people or fight oppression. They just want revenge on Batman for killing Ra's al Ghul. Bane only mentions revolting against the rich and powerful during his speech as a means of overthrowing those in power and giving people the illusion that they can use their resources to thrive and survive.
As I terrorize Gotham, I will feed its people hope to poison their souls. I will let them believe that they can survive so that you can watch them clambering over each other to stay in the sun.
Bane and Talia are literally trying to torture the city in front of Batman and are lying about any attempts to tackle these issues within the system. They want Gotham to believe things will be better for most people, when the truth is that they're going to blow up the city. How does that prove that the movie wants to justify overfunding the police? And furthermore, Where are the police overfunded? Batman doesn't believe in giving the police too many resources, even if he has worked with them before.
Aren't the police supposed to be investigating them?
They don't have the tools to analyze it.
They would if you gave them to them.
One man's tool is another man's weapon.
And if a nuke is literally about to blow up the city, and Batman has to face off against an entire army, then it makes complete sense for him to work with the entire police force to stop Bane. This is the only way to save the city.
Laws are threats made by the dominant socioeconomic ethnic group in a given nation. It's just a promise of violence that's enacted, and police are basically an occupying army. You know what I mean?
Just like real life white liberalism, the movies and TV shows like the Dark Knight trilogy like to show that the institution being widely criticized is necessary for society of all kinds under its umbrella to thrive.
While law enforcement is required for a society to function, that's not a central point of any of the movies as a means of deflecting against criticism towards the police. All of these modern Batman films criticize the police.
It just has to focus on fixing the surface level problems that are present on the power cable instead of addressing the power source feeding into it.
Batman's entire goal is to fight crime and corruption, which is the source of the misconduct we see from the police. That's a huge reason Batman even exists.
For Western society, that power source in question is white supremacy.
I mean, yes and no. White supremacy can play into the corruption of police, but that's not the only way in which the police are corrupted. Maroni isn't a white supremacist, but he still uses the cops to get away with his criminal acts. So white supremacy wouldn't be the sole source of police corruption. There's a multitude of sources that could play into it. I don't know why this would be pinned on the Batman though, since they literally mention that white supremacy is prevalent in Gotham's corruption.
And to admit that this institution of law enforcement, this power cable, draws its power straight from this source would start a process in not only finding another power source that's more beneficial for everyone, but also allow them to see that the power cable in question is unnecessary. And that's hella inconvenient for people who may not agree with where they get said power, but have no problem siphoning from it.
I don't have any idea what point is being made here or how it correlates to the Batman movies. So he suggests that while cops might not agree with white supremacy giving them the power they have, they also have no problem holding on to said power. I'm just so lost here. Not every person who hires police officers is some white supremacist. And even if the creator of the concept of police was a white supremacist, that doesn't mean police officers always use their power in favor of white supremacy in present day.
So instead of admitting that both the power source is just as corrupt as the cord, they draw your eyes on the things we can do to better repair the cord like it did with Batman Begins.
So is he saying that because the concept of policing supposedly came from white supremacy, that means anyone who is a police officer is just as corrupt as a white supremacist? I mean, I don't know where to start with that. If your parents were white supremacists, and therefore the source of the life you have and gave you what you needed to grow up, does that mean you yourself are a white supremacist, even when you finally move out and behave independently? I don't understand this source argument at all, because it's built on a strange leap in logic that can be applied to literally anything in existence. By this logic, if the concept of being a doctor came from white supremacy and only giving medical attention to white people, does that mean any doctor in present day is just as corrupt as white supremacy, just because their occupation came from white supremacy? Like, how does that make sense in the slightest? Wasn't America founded by literal slave owners? Are all Americans who enjoy their freedom just as corrupt as the slave owners that founded the country? Why is it unreasonable that even from corrupt beginnings, institutions can evolve past it and serve better purposes?
Things like making sure the exposed wire is covered with enough electric tape, and making sure the outlets are still good. Then, after making sure that the changes have been made, we're made sure that we understand the necessity of the cord going forward, like in The Dark Knight, and even given a Brothers Grimm-like fairy tale regarding what would happen if we ever do away with the cord or the power source of The Dark Knight Rises, for those who come too close to the truth of what the power source actually is.
Again, this is such a strange leap in logic. Apparently because nearly 200 years ago, the concept of policing was created in favor of white supremacists, that must mean that the police benefit from and serve white supremacy in present day, despite the fact white supremacy is openly hated in present day and isn't a requirement to join the police force, nor does every single cop practice it. He's about to go on a long tangent about Catwoman in the comics and the movies, and I'm not going to play 7 minutes of what I'm not even going to be responding to, so just remember that this entire video is in the description if you want to see.
Due to her whiteness and privilege within Rises, playing into how the trilogy spreads the propagandic falsehood that the police are worth keeping, and that any revolution from this form of supremacy, especially if it's socialistic in nature, is wrong.
This was someone's home.
Now it's everyone's home.
Her problem is forcefully removing people from their homes just to serve others, and Bane literally gets people killed without due process. Why wouldn't Bane's changes to the city be presented as a bad thing?
So when I say that Zoe Kravitz's portrayal of Selina Kyle could have been the saving grace regarding how the Batman handled the romantic promotion of the police in films past, that was not an exaggeration. It definitely helped that we had a Batman that wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty with the cops, even with this film focusing on him learning that he falls under the select individuals that benefit from the system that uses the police to keep the masses Selina's part of in line as Bruce Wayne, and that the good he could do with his privilege as a Wayne, considering what his father did in the past, is just as beneficial as shifting his focus from vengeance to hope as Batman. But if it weren't for Selina and Bruce's attraction to her, making him aware of the classism or being aware of how the roots of Gotham PD mirrors the way real-world policing is rooted in colonization and control of the masses based on experiencing who they really serve and protect firsthand, he wouldn't have learned that as quickly as he did. Instead, the woman scorned angle of the character is amplified in a way that not only gives Batman the need to save Selina from herself by stopping her from killing Falcone once all is revealed about how much control he's gained over Gotham after Thomas Wayne's murder via the Renewal Fund, despite being absolutely justified in doing so.
I'm not sure where his point is leading, but already, I don't see how Selina is justified in killing Falcone. Batman is right when he says she's going to end up paying with him, and I don't even think it's for any of us to decide who should die as a punishment for what they do.
But takes away the aspects about her character being one of the only positive ones in the Reevesverse so far that knows Gotham PD's rottenness is something that can't be treated but only removed for the city to actually start catering to those that have suffered like she did, to where it's now merely the stepping stone to show that all it took for Gotham PD to end years of corruption and solidarity is for a vigilante and one brave yet naive cop to arrest the one man responsible for it.
The film doesn't say years of police corruption can be resolved by arresting one person in control of them. However, you can help the problem by taking power away from pivotal figures involved in many of their corrupt actions. The police still had agency. They didn't have to help Falcone. Many of them simply chose to, out of greed and negligence of the impact their actions have on the city.
Once again, reinforcing the well-intentioned myth that the problem with policing is in the bad apples that need to be thrown away in order for law enforcement to get its groove back, to distract from the systemic issues rooted in its initial conception.
Again, you have the agency to act differently from how something was originally conceived. If law enforcement was created for corrupt reasons, then use law enforcement for the right reasons moving forward. That's how evolution works in general. You can repurpose what's there to fulfill a foundational need for society.
It's not an entire lifetime of systemic control and oppression of people via the white supremacy of colonization that's the main cause of why cops are the way that they are, but that it can be one man trying to take advantage of a power vacuum within a single city.
The power vacuum exists because of the prior corruption in the city.
As if every Gotham City police officer is waiting for the Wiz's Eveline, the Wicked Witch of the West, to melt from hydration.
That's not even close to what the film is communicating. I should also add that the Batman isn't trying to communicate a winning move to wipe away all corruption in the city. That in itself is a difficult question to answer, and it wouldn't be satisfying to have that answer in the first Batman movie with a larger story to tell about Batman's stand against crime. What they're communicating is that there are ways you can help the problems throughout the city. Batman becoming a symbol of hope instead of vengeance isn't going to solve crime and corruption, but it inspires a better view of justice. Riddler only became who he was because Batman's use of fear and vengeance inspired him to take extreme measures against the city, and it becomes easier to justify his actions to himself if he performs them under the guise of getting back at the people who caused the corruption in the city, when the fact of the matter is that Riddler is only doing this for his own personal satisfaction, as well as making a name for himself.
So that they can finally take off their sweatsuits of corruption and finally feel the waters of a brand new day.
Kenzie literally gets arrested for his involvement in police corruption. Batman isn't going to knowingly let off corrupt police officers, he'll bring them to justice if he can. That's basically all the points in his video. I don't think Copaganda is present in these movies at all. I think they did a great job outlining the consequences of police misusing their power, and why there needs to be reforming to begin with. If this movie was attempting to downplay actual abuses of power or shift public perception of police corruption, then sure, it would be Copaganda, but there hasn't been a good example given here. If you disagree, remember that we do Disagreement Day streams every week or so feel free to join when you can. That's all I gotta say for now. Goodbye.